Namaskar. Let me first ask for your pardon, कारण मला मराठी येतं, मराठी समजतं, मराठीत बोलू शकतो, but I can't express myself fluently in Marathi. त्यामुळं आज मी जे हे भाषण देतोय, or this analysis, this will be in English and you'll excuse me for it. Thank you very much, and let me give my thanks to Sahitya Rangabhoomi Pratishthan for inviting me here to give this opportunity to respond to you. Today, what I'm going to do, you know, what Ashok Kulkarni, he asked me to do is to talk about how I write a play. And I said, yes, I will speak. Because what it is like writing a play is a very individual activity. Every playwright has his own method of doing it, and different playwrights do it differently. This is why, even if you have the same theme, different playwrights treat it differently in different ways. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a theme very popular with playwrights and say how I dealt with it. And how other people have dealt with it, you will know, because it's a very famous theme. It's the theme of Yayati in Mahabharata. And as you know, in Marathi, Khandekar, Visa Khandekar, wrote a novel on it, Yayati, a very beautiful novel for which he got a Jnanpith Award. Then there is the play Yayati and Devyani, you know, which was, again, it's on Yayati and so on. And there have been Kachadevyani, there is another play. I wrote Yayati. In Kannada, Sriranga, Adya Rangacharya wrote a play called Sanjeevani at the same time, and there are several plays in Hindi. Now, the question is, why is this story suddenly becomes so important, so resonant, and why did different playwrights take it up? So what I'll do is I'll read out the story of Yayati as synopsized, but as it appears in Mahabharata. Because different people have dealt with it differently, and will then be able to work out why it has to be dealt with differently for different purposes. Yayati, the myth is this, that in the good old age, mythological age, an intensive warfare was raging between the Danavas, that is the demons, and the gods. And this meant a lot of destruction of Danavas, but they didn't ever get defeated because the Danavas had a guru called Shukracharya, and he knew the Sanjeevani Vidya. With the Sanjeevani Vidya, he could bring back to life those who were killed. So the gods, the Devas, were unable to defeat Danavas in this battle, and Shukracharya was very essential to the victory of the Danavas. So he was the Rajguru and so on. So the king of demons, the king of Danavas, was totally dependent on the favors of King Shukracharya, who knew the secret of restoring the dead to life. Now, Shukracharya had a daughter called Devyani, and the king had a daughter of the same age called Sharmishtha. They were the closest of friends. One day, the two girls, along with their friends, went bathing in a forest pond. A sudden wind arose, and it mixed up the clothes which the maidens had left lying on the bank. They rushed to retrieve these garments, and in the resulting confusion, Devyani and Sharmishta happened to put on each other's clothes. Their clothes got mixed up. This resulted in a violent quarrel between the two, and Sharmishta lost her temper and pushed Devyani. She dragged Devyani by her hair to a nearby well, a dry well, and pushed her into the well and went home. Yayati, the king of the lunar agency, the Chandravamsha, was passing by after a hunt. He heard Devyani's moans, helped her out with her hand, pulled her out, and sent her home. As a punishment for Sharmishta's misdemeanor, Shukracharya insisted that Sharmishta should serve as a slave of Devyani. The king had no option but to agree. Thus, Sharmishta became Devyani's slave. They were friends, and now suddenly Sharmishta finds that she is a slave. A few days later, Yayati ran into Devyani again when he came hunting into the woods. She recognized him, and she told him that she was a virgin and that he had held her right hand and pulled her up by right hand, so he should accept her as his wife. Now, this is one of the very nice conventions in ancient India, which unfortunately we have lost, which is that, you know, the girl had the privilege to say, now you are holding me by my right hand and you pulled me up, so I choose you as my husband. And he had to accept, honor the pledge, as it were. And she says this, and Devyani gladly agreed and married her. Devyani moved to the capital with Sharmishta and the other slaves in her entourage. So Devyani became the queen of India, Mahabharata, or whatever it is. Sharmishta was a slave. Devyani had 2 sons by Yayati. In the meantime, Sharmishta approached Yayati. She was also in the palace, and she was an attractive woman. She seduced Yayati, and she had 3 sons. However, she managed to mislead Devyani by claiming that she had had her sons by some hermit. But sooner or later, the truth came out. And when Devyani discovered the truth, she flew into a rage and fled to her father, Shukracharya. And Shukracharya cursed Yayati to immediate old age. But, so Yayati, who was young and handsome and powerful, suddenly became old. But Yayati pleaded with Shukracharya. His entreaties softened the old man's heart, and he gave a counter curse, Ushap, that if one of Yayati's sons would accept his curse of decrepitude, of old age, in exchange for his youth, Yayati could become young again. So one of the sons had to say, I'll take on your old age and I'll take you take my youth. Accordingly, Yayati approached each one of his 5 sons, one by one, entreating them to accept his curse. But the 4 elder sons refused. Only Puru accepted his father's curse, Puru, who was the youngest of them. And Yayati thus regained his youth while Puru became senile. Yayati ruled for 1,000 years and realized that eternal youth was like pouring ghee into fire. It was like pouring ghee, and it was useless. It would merely get consumed and would never put out the fire. Therefore, at the end of 1,000 years, he had, realization that it was all useless. So what he did was, he went back to his son and he said, you take back your youth and please give me back my curse and I'll take it. Now, before we start discussing this script, I want to make 1 or 2 points clear. We should be clear about what a play is. What is a natak? Usually we associate plays with dialogues. But you must remember, since you're all, I think, aspiring to be writers of different kind, that a dialogue is not a conversation. There's a big difference. When you go in a train, you hear 2 people talking. You hear, it's interesting, they're talking, they're fighting, or they're, proposing, or whatever it is, and then they get down and go and you forget it. There is just a conversation between an exchange of ideas between 2 people, but it doesn't give you an idea of where they came from, where they're going, and you are not interested, you are on your own way somewhere else. Now, the point about dialogue is that the audience has come there to listen to dialogues being exchanged by the actors. So the dialogue has to tell the audience, who are these people? The first thing a dialogue has to create is the characters. If it's A and B, what is A, what is B, where does A come from, where does B come from? And because of this, a play essentially has, although what happens in a play is what happens in front of you, has a past and a future. And each character brings a past and a future. And a good playwright should be able to, with each sentence, bring out this past and the future about it. Then what does a dialogue do? This is the second point. What are these characters trying to do? Of course, they're trying to tell a story. Everyone is interested in a story. But what is actually happening there in any play, in any good play, is one character is trying to persuade the other character to do something. There has to be action. People say that there has to be action in a play. But an action doesn't mean that they have to run around on stage, beat each other, this. The action is in the dialogue. And the action in the dialogue says that one character should try to persuade the other character. It may be Manthara trying to persuade Kaikeyi that her son should become a king. It may be someone trying to seduce another person. It may be Lady Macbeth trying to tell Macbeth, kill the king. And all these are sort of major, well-known cases of persuasion, but even in smaller things, in little suggestions, little gestures, the whole process of persuasion goes on between 2 characters. Then there is a the second degree of persuasion which happens, which is that this dialogue must persuade the audience that it's worth listening to. Otherwise, the audience will get bored. So, there are two kinds of levels of activities going on. The two actors or actresses are trying to persuade each other, resisting the persuasion. So that is a conflict there. That conflict arises because the other person may or may not agree to what persuasion is going on. But even more important is that these 2 or 3 characters on stage are trying to persuade the audience that this scene is worth listening to, the play is worth listening to, and this is important. So you see, that is a basic notion that every playwright has to bear in mind. Then there are other limitations, which are typically theater limitations. A novel can go on forever. I mean, as you know, War and Peace is something 2,500 years, 2,500 pages. But a play can't go on forever. There was a time when people used to sit through the night to see plays, but then they were allowed to sleep. They had a great advantage, which we don't have these days. So today you have to have a play which at the most, can go on for 2.5 hours at the moment. You see, because ultimately what decides the length of a play is the capacity of our bottom muscles. After 2.5 hours, the audience just wants to go home to their activity. And this physical thing doesn't happen in a novel or in a poem or in anything else. You can read it tomorrow. You can do. Here it is one continuous activity. So you have this limitation that a play has to be about 2 hours long. Second limitation is that a play can be seen only, say, ideally like an audience of this kind, say about 550 people. It has been decided that after 550 people or 600 people, if the last man cannot see the facial expression of the actors, in which case a lot of the charm of the theater is gone. Because ultimately, people have to be able to see what's going on stage, and this limited to 400. So what the play has to do is to keep the concentration of 500 people, 500 different people. They may be children, they may be women, they may be adults, whatever it is. This concentration of everyone to listen to what's happening, this is essential. It's not like a play. It's not like a poem where you write a poem to one person and the person may like it or reject it or whatever it is. And the third point, therefore, if this is to attract everyone else, is everyone must be interested in what is the play about. A play has a story, of course, and the story keeps you engaged, but ultimately the point comes, why have I paid this money? Why am I sitting here? Why am I going through these agonies? None of these demands are made by a novel. Because you can read them at home. None of these demands are made by a poem. But this is very unique about theater. J. Kulkarni, the Marathi Kadambarikar, he was in Dharwad and he was a friend of Ashok Kulkarni. And Ashok Kulkarni once told me, J. Kulkarni said to him, नाटक गिरीश कर्नाड नाटक कसे लिहितात हो फार परावलंबी कला आहे बुवा. It's paravlambi because I write my plays, it is done by the directors, it's done by 20 actors, the actors have to persuade, the director has to persuade the actors that this is how it's to be done, and the actors in turn have to persuade the audience that it's worth watching. So there are degrees of persuasion that are worth watching, that need to give the play a focus. And one thing in a play, which you must bear in mind, you can never refer back. You cannot, काय झालं, पहिल्या अंकात काय झालं? No, you won't get an answer because you can't stop the play. The play goes on. It goes on continuously. So the playwright has to be very clear that whatever he's explaining in terms of narrative is clear to everyone at every moment. That the whole meaning, structure of meanings is very clear. So let me then come to Yayati. And let me see how I approach the play. The main, you know that there are many reasons why the play may have appealed and may have attracted playwrights. The main question, but it attracts everyone for one episode, which is the exchange of youth. This is unique, you know. There are other stories, but here it's very unique that a son becomes old and the father becomes young, and the father is allowed to carry on his sexual life by his son. Now, this is a fascinating, but it's also a horrifying picture. Now, the question is, why does Puru accept this? Why does Puru accept to be the, accept the curse? We must be very clear if we are going to write a play, why he does it. Now, it's easy enough to say, Yayati had an affair with Sharmishtha, and therefore Puru was born, therefore it was Puru's responsibility to accept the curse, because he was born of that union. But no, if you look at the story, that's not what the story is saying. What the story is saying is, Yayati didn't ask Puru first. He asked Devayani's children first. He first went to Devayani's children and said, will you accept my curse? They had nothing to do with it. They had nothing to do with Sharmishta. They had nothing to do with the whole problem. But he goes to each son, one by one, and only it comes to Puru because he's the youngest son and who has to accept it. So what the story is saying is that it's not a question of responsibility, it's a question of duty. If you're a son, you must accept your father's problems, And this is a very great and very interesting cultural insight into Hindu society. Because if you look at Greek plays, if you look at Western society, the central motive, the central myth is Oedipus, as Freud tells us. And what happens in Oedipus is, we're told that the Oedipus desires his mother and aggresses against his father. He kills his father. This happens in Electra, who desires her father and, is against her mother, and so on. So in Western myths, it's the children who are aggressing against the parents. But in Indian myths, it's the other way around. It's always the parents who are aggressing against their children. It's the parents who are demanding the youth of the children. Not just the story of Yayati. Look at let me give you another example. Shantanu, for instance, is a very good idea, very good example. Shantanu falls in love with Matsyagandha. He wants to marry her. Matsyagandha's father says, oh, but if I let my daughter marry you, what will happen to her children? You already have a son, Bhishma. He will become the king. My daughter's children will have no future. So what does Bhishma do? Ultimately, he says, I will never have a woman. I will not have children. So what Bhishma does is to make himself a Shanda, a eunuch for the sake of his father. And this is a repeated motive. Yayati, the same thing happens. What does Yayati do? Yayati says, so that I can have sexual life for 1,000 years, you, my son, you become a Shanda, virtually, an old man or whatever it is. A beautiful example of this is the story of birth of Ganesha, Ganapati. You will probably know it. And it's a very Freudian story except for the final twist. What happens in the Ganesha story is this. Parvati was bathing. She felt dirty. She was sitting, she felt dirty. And as you know, feeling dirty is also a sexual metaphor in Freud, who refers to it quite often. So Parvati takes off the myrrh, all the dirt in her body, and she makes a son, a child. And she tells the child, I'm going to bathe, so you see that no one comes in. So she goes into her bathing room, Snanagraha, and the child is waiting outside when Shiva comes. Now, when Shiva wants to go in, the son says no, because the son doesn't know him. He doesn't know his father. So the son says, no, you can't go in. And Shiva says, I can't enter my own wife's bathing room. How is it possible? See the sexual metaphor, how it develops here. And so there is a fight between the father and the son. Now, if this was a Western story, what would have happened is the son would have killed the father. He would have beheaded the father. But because it's an Indian story, the father beheads the son. It's the same motive that recovers. And his head is cut off. And then when the mother comes, he says, what have you done? He was my son. You killed him, they go looking for a head, and then they find elephant head, again, with his trunk and so on and so on. So the sexual metaphor continues. And so we have Ganesha. Now, this is a recurrent myth, and that is why I think Yayati is such an important myth. Because that's why, whether you consciously accept it or not, because even a myth like Ramayana, what ultimately happens? Dasharath has given some promise to Kaikeyi, and to fulfill that, Rama gives up his kingdom, goes and loses his wife. You see, so this is the focal point that we must accept, and that the 5 sons are expected to do their duty and they don't do it. Now, when I come to writing the play, the question is, do I really need 5 sons? It's possible to write a play in which you could all have 5 sons with their different characters. You must have seen a play like a film like Magnificent Seven, or The Seven Samurai, or you may have seen The Dirty Dozen. Where there are 12 people and each character is different. Someone is nice, someone is handsome, someone is ugly. You can make it an interesting process by having 5 sons, all different and so on. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted a much more compact play. Since the play is about the relationship between the son to the father, what I decided is I'll have only 1 son. So I left off the other 4 sons, Yadu, etc., etc. And in my play, there's only Puru, and that is Yayati, and the confrontation is between the father and the son. Then the second question comes. At least these 5 sons. You see, this is what I'm saying. When you take a material, whether you take a historical play, whether you take a myth, you have to keep on asking questions. Don't take it on trust, because it is important, because it replies to these answers. You get replies, and then you have to find solutions to them. So the next question is it necessary that Puru is Sharmishta's son? Because, that creates a very big problem in my play and for the playwright. Because why was Yayati cursed? Yayati was cursed because he betrayed Devyani and he slept with Sharmishta. Now, if you make Puru Sharmishta's son, how old was he, Puru? Must have been at least 15, 16, 17, 18. तर 18 वर्ष काय झालं? What happened? Why was there no curse? I mean, why did it take 18 years for Yayati to be cursed? Shukracharya. What? So now, again, if you do Purana, you get different explanations as to what happened during this. Sharmishta hid him in the jungle, vagare, vagare, vagare. But I have no time. I have as I said, I have only 2 hours and I have to finish it. So what I did was that I said, Puru is not Sharmishta's son, but he is a son by a previous wife. It didn't matter, so long as it's a son, as the story tells you. And he doesn't have to be Sharmishta's son. So you get a plotting where the central point of the play, we've got the central point of the play. Now, please let me again tell you, for all of you who know, that in Mahabharata, before Yayati enters the scene, there is a Kachadevayani story. Kach comes and he falls in love with Devyani, vagare, vagare, which I have left out. If you read Khandekar, Kach is the hero. This is the whole great thing about myths. It's what you can do with it. And Khandekar uses Kach as the hero and representative of the present age. I just left out Kach. In it starts with Yayati coming and the whole story. And the focal point of my play, as I planned it, was this confrontation between the father and the son. So let's start at the beginning. You go back to Shukracharya's ashram in the jungle. There are these 2 girls, Devyani and Sharmishta. They're supposed to be fond of each other. How fond were they of each other? Look at the story. Their costumes get mixed up. And what happens? Sharmishta gets so upset that she drags Devyani by her hair, takes her to a well and pushes her in a well and goes home. It shows absolute hatred. It shows no love. So what it suggests that the relationship between the 2 girls was very fraught. It was not as simple as Mahabharata tells you. It makes it look very simple, but you look at the episode and you know immediately that it's not very simple. Because look at the complexities of the 2 girls. One is Devyani, she's a Brahmin, upper caste, probably fair, and daughter of Shukracharya. The other one is a Rakshasi, Danav, probably dark, probably beautiful, but she's the princess. And yet, she has to kowtow to Devyani because her father needs her father. So the relationship is not just of two friends, but two rivalries of different kinds. Rivalry probably in their youth, rivalry in their looks, rivalry in their power, etc., etc. Anyway, we see that in the anger of Sharmishta, how Devyani was treated and what anger there was. So we come back to the story then. So she puts Devyani in the well and she comes home. Then the story says in Mahabharata that Yayati came and he pulled Devyani out. Now in Mahabharata, he comes again next day and then Devyani tells him, next day or next month or whatever it is, but we have no time. So I have telescoped it. In my play, what happens, Yayati comes, he sees her, he hears some woman crying, he goes to the well, he pulls out Devyani, and Devyani says to him when she comes out, she recognizes him. I mean, after all, Yayati was the Samrat, and she says, you held me by my hand, now you must take me as your wife. And he does. Why does he do it? We won't say it, but he knows that she's Shukracharya's daughter, that Shukracharya has Sanjeevani Vidya, that Yayati is ambitious. He is so there is a whole lot of motivations. It's not just attraction and one woman saying, you've held my hand, pull me up, etc. No. It's a much more complex situation. And this is what makes myths so interesting, that even in the smallest of these episodes, you can see a whole new world of anxieties, of desires, of angers, and so on and so on. So here you have it. So that's all right. So we've come to the story. Yayati marries Devyani. Devyani comes to Hastinapur with Yayati, and she brings Sharmishta with her. Now, Sharmishta is her slave. We could say that this is where the first act ends. If you have acts, I mean, don't have to have acts, but because one episode, what happened in the Aranya, in the Vanvasala, now we are in the second episode. You see, one thing is, what I have told you now, what I have done with the Mahabharata story is not what a playwright does. It is what a carpenter does. All I have done is taken the old main story and done carpentry. When the Hindi films do a film on some novel, for instance, then they decide, they call a scriptwriter and they say, we have to do a script. Can you do a script? Then the scriptwriter sits with the novel, which is about 600 pages. I have done it with Kanur Hegarthi. Then you reduce it down to 2 hours and so on. Hey nako, te nako. You can use that as intimation, etc. etc. And there are professional scriptwriters who do it extremely well. And they are not geniuses, but they are good craftsmen. They are like carpenters. Arthur Miller says that he became a good playwright because he was a carpenter. He started his life as a carpenter. And, joining and cutting and putting and nailing and all that helped him in... So now we are in the second half, and the story begins. And what happens is, in the next step of the story, is that Sharmishta seduces Yayati. Now, here is a real problem. It's not as simple as you think. How does Sharmishta seduce Yayati? Because Yayati was not one of these, innocent young men. He was the king of India, and the palace was probably full of women who were willing to throw themselves at him. So it's just Sharmishta going up to him and said, I want to go to bed with you, would not have been enough. Or he probably would have gone to bed with her and thrown her out. She has to do something in which not only she must seduce him, but establish that she is on equal par with Devyani. Now this is a technical problem. This is not a carpentry problem. This is a problem of how you are going to solve this problem. How are you going to build up Sharmishta in this fashion? And it would be interesting if you see Khandekar or Shirvadkar and so on, that how differently they have solved it. What I did was this. My solution to the problem was, Sharmishta comes as the Dasi to the palace, but she doesn't accept her Dasya. She makes life miserable for everyone. She scolds, she's Shivyadete, and she behaves terribly, she is vicious. Everything she knows about viciousness she does, and makes life in the palace completely miserable for everyone. And no one can do anything to her because she is the special Dasi of Devyani, you see. Devyani wants to see her suffer. And Sharmishta says, yes, this is how I suffer. I'll make you suffer too. So she makes her suffer. So there is this. So ultimately the pitch in the palace reaches such a point that Yayati says to Devyani, Puriyata, I can't, I'm sending her back. So he comes back and he calls Sharmishta and he says, Sharmishta, no, look, I'll send you back. If you want to go, go. She says, go back where? My father has sent me as a Dasi here. I have to be Dasi. I'll live here and I'll die here. I'm not going back to my, shamed like this to my father. And so on and so on and so on. She says, no, I'm going to be here and that. Ultimately, Yayati says, God, when is this going to end? So Sharmishta says, no, there is an end. My father, before he sent me out, gave me a poison, a kupi full of poison. I'll take this poison and I'll die. Because once I die, there'll be no solution, there's no problem. So give me the permission. So she says, everything will be solved. So she takes out the kupi and she starts taking the poison. When Yayati jumps forward and says, no, drop that kupi, don't take the poison. And she says, sir, you're holding my right hand. You see? So she has put herself in exactly the same position as Devyani, but from a different angle. And she's not done it from someone being pulled helplessly. It's someone saying, I'm going to die, and being saved, and saying, now you're holding my right hand. You see, so in a sense, Sharmishta, by that one, when that an episode occurred to me, I said, good, I'm a playwright. ठीक है. This hasn't occurred to anyone, it has occurred to me. So, so we go from there, and Yayati, of course, has no answer. He can't say no, and she seduces him, and the rest of the story takes place. Devyani comes to know, she comes, she gets angry, and then Devyani runs to her father, and Father Shukracharya curses Yayati. But here there is another technical problem. You see, a playwriting, because it's only 2 hours, it's only stage, is full of technical problems. And you should be able to solve them. She runs to her Shukracharya, but Shukracharya tyaveli kutha hote. Where was he? He must have been somewhere in the jungle. Now, are we going to wait for dear Devyani to get onto her chariot, go to him, 4 days journey to Kutha? No, there's no time. We have to have things happen there. So we must have Shukracharya there. Then what was Shukracharya doing in the palace? Problem. We put him away at the moment. We'll solve the problem later. You see, I must, for a moment, let me tell you that writing a play is really like building a house. I built my house in Madras, and I built it by, my wife was going for a walk with her daughter. She saw a beautiful tree. Hey, this is not Madras, Bangalore. This was in the days when plots were easily available. And that tree was beautifully spreading out like that. And my daughter said to my wife, oh, we could have a terrace under those branches. And my wife said, yes. So she said to me, let's build a house here, buy the plot. We built a house. The trees, the branches spread out. We built a terrace under the branch where we could have a party. As soon as the terrace was built, there was a space underneath of the same size. So that naturally made the dining room. So the next dining room happened. Now, if the party is going to be upstairs on terrace or in the dining room, you need a kitchen next to it. You see, the kitchen is automatically there. The staircase goes. But if kitchen is there, you can't have a bathroom next to it. So the bathroom goes a little further down. And from the dining room, you have a living room. So what I'm saying is that there is a step-by-step evolution in architecture of how you build a house. Where do you want the bathroom? Where do you want the madi? Where do you want the main door? Where do you want the back door? Where do you want the postman to come? All these decide the structure of the house. And it's the same with a play, or has to. I mean, many people may say it's not necessary, they write as they like, but this is how I like to write. It's almost like a mathematical puzzle. So we are here, and now the Shukracharya we have to solve the problem. We don't know how to solve the problem of what was Shukracharya doing in the Rajavada at that time. But anyway, he's cursed, and Yayati becomes old, and then Yayati goes around. There are not too many sons now. We have only Puru. The other 4 sons are gone. So Puru, and he asks Puru, and for whatever reason, now this we have to work out again. Why did Puru accept the curse? But anyway, for the sake of the story, Puru says, I will take the old age. Then we have another technical problem, which is that Mahabharata tells us that Yayati lived for 1,000 years, and 1,000 years enjoyed life. Now this is the playwright's headache. Kya karna 1,000 varsha? How are you going to show what happened? You have to show all that happened in 1,000 years in that next half an hour or 1 hour that's left to you now, because you've been telling the story until now. And apart from the time, you also have the budget you have to worry about. The producer is sitting there saying, don't have too many actors, don't have too much money. These are all conditions. These are all things that condition the whole writing of a play. So now I have to find out what happened. Why did Yayati give the old, without going through 1,000 years, why did Yayati return the old age? Why did Puru take it? What happened? Now, I mentioned one thing. You see, simply things happening on stage don't affect the audience. They must affect someone. Some character must be affected. Kunavar tari tasa pranam wala hua. So now I have to find a reason, some person who was affected by Puru's sacrifice. Some person whose life was, affected. Now, Puru is a young man of 18 years, say, and suddenly he's become old. So who would be affected? So I invented him a wife, a young wife, say about 16-year-old princess, and she's come, he's married her, he's brought her a bride, and suddenly he's possessed by this desire to sacrifice himself for his son, for his father. He sacrifices himself, and there she is. She's faced with a husband who's, 1,000 years old, and a father-in-law who's young. Okay, now how will she react? Now, this character helped me as a playwright to bring the whole conflict to this. What she does in my play, I'll tell you the climax right away. She says, she goes to Yayati and says, look, let me tell you, I don't know Puru. We just met the other day, Swayamvar dhala, mi lagna kela. I wanted him for his youth. He doesn't have youth, but you have youth. So you accept me. You take me as your wife. I'm your daughter-in-law, but so what? It doesn't matter to me. I mean, Chandravanshi Raja salel mala, koni salel. So Yayati salel, Puru sudha salel. So why don't you accept this? Now, and Yayati is shocked. But you see, you can't put this so simply, because immediately the audience will react against that girl. They will say, what kind of a woman is this? If you have to create that it was a tragedy not for Yayati and Puru, but also for that girl who had come expecting a new life, vaivahik jeevan, and wanted to, looking forward to it, that her whole future was shattered. Now, you have to build that up also. You see, in a play, everything has to be carefully. I'll tell you, in my play, in the last act, what happens is that Chitralekha, that is the girl, is brought into a Ranivas, but the Ranivas has no lights. Lights is there. And ek dasi ete, and she puts out all the lights because they don't want her to see how ugly her husband has become. And he's become ugly and ancient, and she says, why not lights in my Ranivas? I would like to welcome my husband. And after a while, the dasi tells her, you know what's happened. Your husband has become old, and your father-in-law is young, and we are all upset about it. Your whole life is ruined. We don't want you to see him. And Chitralekha says, has he done such a marvelous thing? What a marvelous person. I didn't know him. I thought he was just another prince, but to give up one's youth for one's father, no, he's someone I admire, someone I love. I have become a real, a lucky bride. I must greet him, she says. She says, I must Aarti karela hai. Bring me Aarti. And the Dasi very reluctantly gives her Aarti, and this 18-year-old girl, full of enthusiasm. In the pitch darkness, the Puru is brought, and he's brought to her. Chitralekha Aarti kala, Aarti utsalte, and the light of that Aarti falls on his face. Now, already it's an ugly face. It's wrinkled, it's crabby, and so on. She sees and she can't, and she suddenly screams and drops the Aarti. And she says, no, I can't, I won't live with this face. It's not possible. So it is not that she rejects it logically. Physically, it's impossible to accept this ugly spider that has been now foisted on her. So now this creates the whole Rajwada is in Andhar, and then Yayati decides that he has to solve this problem. Puru is taken away, Yayati comes and says, now look, he gives all the excuses. The whole future of Rashtra is on you. I am the king. Puru is young. He doesn't know. You must help me rule the future, etc., etc. He all, tries to persuade her in various ways and says, there is no solution. And then, you know what Chitralekha says? Sorry, there is a solution. And surprisingly, I found it here in this bedroom. He says, what? She has found that Vishachi Kupi, which had been dropped by Sharmishta. So she says, it's very simple. I just have to take it. I don't have a life. I'll take it. And she tries to take it. Yayati jumps and holds her, but he can't hold her. He has held her by the hand and then suddenly withdraws. Because he has known what's happened when he held a woman by her right hand. But the young girl doesn't know this. And she says, no, look, I'm trying to take poison and you won't even stop me. You, the king, you don't even have the heart. And she says, okay, I'll take it. And she takes it and she dies. She dies in pain. And Yayati sees her die in pain, writhing in anguish there on her wedding night. Okay? And then he realizes what he has done. And then Sharmishta comes and says, well, great future here. It's lying in front of you. This is the future you are trying to do. And Yayati then says, no, call back Puru. I will take back. Now, whether this is a convincing argument or not, the audience itself has to decide. But for my, it gave me satisfaction that I had a positive reason as to why Yayati takes back his curse. And in all the shows that have taken place, the audience has been accepted, has been convinced that this is a logical argument. So the point I was trying to make, the reason why I've told you all this story, is that at each point you have to persuade the audience, ki hey ho shakta. If you've lost them, just lost them. Now, I have mentioned 4 characters here, but there is a 5th one, which you can see lurking, and once you do the play, you will see her, which is the Dasi. You see, there is a Dasi there. When Chitralekha comes in, she's brought in by the Dasi, who's putting out all the lights. Currently, the Dasi knows what's happening in the kitchen of the palace. And she's giving excuses and say, you shouldn't see your husband in the first time. And ultimately, when Chitralekha throws out the husband and says, I don't want to take him away, Puru. And she has to take him. What the Dasi does is, I found this Vichashi Kupi here. Keep this. Suggesting, take it. Now, why should a Dasi say to the princess, take the poison? She has a history of her marriage going wrong and anguish and so on. So now I won't go into that because it will go on for too long. But the point is, at each point you have to motivate. You see, human beings, whether they act with motivation or not is up to them. Sometimes one feels there is motiveless cruelty, motiveless passion, etc. But in a play, you've got to motivate. And every action has to have motive, even if it's a Dasi, who has seen Sharmishta in fact, the Dasi doesn't come only in the last act, because people will not accept a character brought in just to solve a problem, like the Deus Ex Machina. She's there from the first act, and from the first act we see Sharmishta harassing her, making her cry, weep. When Sharmishta makes hell in the kitchen, you see the impact on the Dasi, and the Dasi has seen this. So the Dasi's anguish is built right through, and her married life, etc., while the main drama is going on. It acts as a kind of minor subplot. And so at the end, we come to the end of my play, Yayati, and my resolution of how you solve it. But you know what's happened in between? What's happened is that the Mahabharata story has changed its color, as you will have known. The Mahabharata story is a moral story. What it says is that lust, you can indulge in lust, you can indulge in sex, you can indulge in this, is ultimately no good. Ultimately, it won't take you anywhere. You will exhaust it. And ultimately, like Yayati, you will want to accept, your own this. In my play, what happened, because I was then, when I wrote it, I was young, and I was greatly influenced by the philosophy of existentialism, Jean-Paul Sartre and so on. And that philosophy said that every human being must bear the responsibility of his action. That to be born a human being is to be born with a responsibility. And what is the responsibility? Your own life. You have to bear the responsibility of your life and act according to that responsibility. And that was influencing me very much when I wrote the play. And that comes through in Yayati. What it in fact says is that Yayati was being irresponsible. He was the king. He should have behaved in a particular way. When he didn't, when he slept with Sharmishta, he should have accepted those consequences. But whatever it is, by asking Puru to take the sharp, he was passing on his own responsibility to his son, and thereby escaping it. There is no possibility of doing that successfully. So the whole story, the whole play became a play about responsibility and human life and so on. At the end of the play, Yayati goes. Sharmishta goes with him. Devani, of course, has already run away with her father. And the only character left on stage is Puru, who right through the play I have shown as someone who was a weakling, who was overwhelmed by his father Yayati, Motha, Asa Samrat, and this man overburdened by his father's responsibility, of his father's personality, and not being able to escape this personality. He is left on stage, and all through he says, I don't have any questions to ask. I don't know what to ask of life. This is another existential principle, which is that you should have the right to ask questions. And the play ends with Puru standing there, alone on the stage, with his wife dead in front of him. And he turns up and he says, God, what does all this mean? What does all this mean? And that's where the play ends. So that's my play, and I hope I have been able to explain, at least make sense of why I wrote it and why I wrote it as I did. The point is, as I said, a play has to be like a well-built house or a building where every corner has a beam, a solid beam, or a door or a window. Why? You have to go on asking. And this is very important in India, because when some of my plays were done in America, I hope you don't mind mentioning it, you act with American actors. The American actors are continually, they're all college actors, they're continually asking, why should I say this? No, I won't say this. Some feminist girl will say, no, I won't say this. That's an anti-feminist dialogue. So you say, but it's in the play. No, but I won't say it, etc., etc. They keep questioning. In India, actors rarely question. You give them the play, they do it, and they try to make the most of it. So we don't train our actors to question, to say why this and why that. And that burden has to be borne both by the actors as well as by the playwrights. And this is a responsibility that the playwright has to bear of saying, why do you do this, and so on. Now, I have given you a kind of structure of my play, Yayati. That's not the only structure. This is a narrative structure, a simple structure. But any great play that you read, you will find very carefully structured. Before I end my lecture now, I'll give you one example, and that is Shakespeare's Hamlet. You know Hamlet, and simple story. And then slowly you realize, what is Hamlet's story? Hamlet goes abroad to the university. He hears that his father has been killed, his mother has been molested. He comes back and he finds that his uncle is probably responsible. And then, in the end, Hamlet finds a duel with Laertes, who's the brother of Ophelia. And what is Laertes' story? Laertes goes to a university. He hears that his father has been killed, that his sister has gone mad. He comes back and he finds that Hamlet's uncle may or may not be responsible, and ultimately he thinks Hamlet is responsible. So the final duel in Hamlet is, on one side there's Hamlet, and on one side there's Laertes, and both the stories are the same. It's the same story Shakespeare repeats twice. On the side of Hamlet, Hamlet becomes a major tragic figure. Laertes remains a small figure. But at the climax, there are two people, a person, both of them had gone abroad, heard that their father was killed, heard that their sister or mother was molested, have come back, and now are facing each other. So it's like a syllogism, a mathematical thing where the same equation is facing each other in this. And it's not an accident. This is not reading too much. If you see Lear, for instance, you get in King Lear. King Lear trusts his two sons, three daughters. Two he trusts, and third is the wrong one he mistrusts. As a result, what happens is King Lear goes mad and wanders on the moors. And as he was wandering on the moor, he meets Gloucester, the Duke of Gloucester. And what's happened to Gloucester? Gloucester is andhra hai. His eyes have been removed by his son, whom he trusted. That is, it's again the same story. King Lear trusted the wrong child and suffers. Gloucester trusted the wrong child, has become blind. And on the moor is a madman and a blind man, both of them with the same background story. Now, this is not an accident. You see, you may say that Shakespeare is a genius and all this came out flowing. That may be so, but structures don't come naturally. You have to work for them. When Bhimsen Joshi sings a very intricate alap, it isn't just inspiration. There are hours and hours and hours of riyaz that has gone into it. It's created it. And a playwright also needs to do it, to read other plays, analyze them. When you write, question them, and so on. And then you see in the greatest of plays, there's always a structure. A simple example is Shakuntal. I'm mentioning Shakuntal just to say it's not only in the Western plays that you find structure. Shakuntala is a very finely textured play, but Shakuntala, the first act of Shakuntala is in the ashram of Kanwa, and there are no marital relationships. Shakuntala's mother was not married. She was an apsara. She left her there, and Shakuntala's all her friends and relations are all dear children, and Dasi, vagere, Anuradha. And Kanwa is not her father. She is an orphan in a pseudo family. That's how Shakuntala, the play begins, and it ends where Dushyant and Shakuntala meet in an ashram of a family man. Where everyone is connected, and Dushyant meets his wife and meets his son, and all the relationships are established. So very clearly, there is there's a movement in Shakuntala from the first act where all relationships are nebulous to the last act where they are all brought together. And this is not an accident, but ultimately, and this is the final point I want to make, whether a play works or not, apart from structuring and so on, it has to have genuine truth of experience. Fake emotions always show. On a stage, this is where great plays and minor plays differ. Whether they convince you, they may bring tears in your eyes, they may bring laughter to your eyes, but do they convince you by their truthfulness? And in this, I'll take again one final example before I stop, and that is again from Shakuntala. And this is a riddle I have always asked my students. In the last act, Shakuntala has not seen her husband for 13 years. Bharat, her son, is with her. And the belief was that Bharat had a kankan, and anyone who could remove that kankan was his father. Anyone else would be killed. It would become a snake and kill him or whatever it is. And Dushyant comes and he sees this child playing with the lion, and he goes and he takes that kankan, and he's not bitten. So, the news spreads that Bharat's father has come. So, news reaches Shakuntala that your husband has come. Now, Shakuntala comes. She sees her husband. What will she say? Think for yourself. Think of yourself as Kalidas. Now, the question is, here is the most important moment in Shakuntala, where Shakuntala is seeing her husband, whom she hasn't seen for 13 years, who had forgotten her, now has come in search for. What would she say? Any modern or simple second-rate playwright would say, Prananath, what happened? How could you do this? She doesn't say that. Shakuntala looks at Dushyant and says, Na khalu arya yeva. He doesn't look like my husband, she says. You see, because 13 years have passed, she has also forgotten. You see, it's not just Dushyant has forgotten his wife, but Shakuntala has also forgotten. She only remembers Dushyant as he was 13 years ago. But in that 13 years, that man has suffered so much that he has changed. You see, so someone like Kalidas, for all his being called a romantic and great, is at the base, there is this hard truth. What the play is about is time. It is how Shakuntala has aged, how Dushyant has aged, and that Kalidas never forgets. I think that is the strength of a great playwright. Now, on that note, I'll end my lecture. Thank you very much for giving me this chance for talking to you.
Hello.
And you said responsibility, and then you said that it is not about responsibility, but it is about duty. So I would like you to elaborate on that and
well, I'll tell you that.
So the difference between the two.
By responsibility, I mean the human responsibility. You say to yourself, this is what I think in Sanskrit literature, in Sanskrit philosophy would be called the Purusharthas. Each one of the various ashramas, the person has a different Purushartha. If you're a married man, your moral responsibility is different. If you're a young fellow, your responsibility. Here, I was using responsibility in the Western sense of what you generate out of yourself by your own moral sense. By duty, I meant he is asked to do by society. Tu mulga hai, tu te sahan kar. That was the difference.
Thank you.
What you explain the structure of these things. As an author, to narrate the story, in which character you entered and come one by step these things?
Well, my great advantage was I was also an actor. Even if I'm writing Iago, my sympathy has to be with Iago. I write characters thinking not in terms of trying to think this is important, this is not important, but how would I feel if I was that character? Malakai Watlast. What would I have done? Which makes, I hope, at least that's what I hope, makes each character complete, because I sympathize at that moment with that character. There is no central character. I therefore don't have a villain or, in my play, Tughlaq does all kinds of awful things. But I felt that in his position, he would have done it for various reasons. What does human beings do? So, no, that I think is essential for playwrights to empathize with every character. And this is why people love doing someone like Shakespeare. Because you don't have to do Othello, you only have to do Iago, you have to do Desdemona. It's still a full character. It's full-blooded, as you know, this is an example I didn't want to give. He creates such full-blooded characters that when Savai Mazavaran's Mrityu was written in 1880, whatever it is, by Khadilkar, Oh, Kadalkar. Well, Savai Madhavrao was based on Hamlet, and the villain was based on Iago. म्हणजे Hamlet was taken out of Hamlet, the play Hamlet, and Iago was taken out of Othello. शेक्सपियरच्या 2 नाटकांतली 2 पात्र घेऊन Khadilkar uses them almost as human beings, like historical characters. It shows how real those characters must have been to Khadilkar. You know, he's writing a historical play and he's using these as historical models. So that is the strength. That's why Shakespeare is one of the great writers, because he creates these characters.
Writing a better draft or a better draft, that seems an endless process. But at what point one can decide that I should lock my script?
A translation is never completed. It's always abandoned. You abandon it. Despair is the only thing that, you can't improve it anymore. And this happens with plays. Agni Ani Paus, I wrote for 30 years because I knew I had a great theme, but every time I felt, no, it's not coming. Something is missing. Why is it haunting me? What was it? So I kept on. I didn't... and it changed. I mean, now I look at the first draft and I feel like laughing because it seems so silly. The point is, again, as Ramanujan was saying, the first draft is always a point of departure for me. When I write the first draft, I'm only pouring myself out. Maja dokyat je kai ahe, it's there. But it's like what you want in a house, as I said. I want a kitchen, I want a balcony, I want a stair. Then you sit and put it together. And similarly, in plays, the first draft gets everything ahead inside, and then I sit and I slowly shape it into different forms, and it takes a long, long time. To me, it's a very painful. That's why in my whole life I've written 50 years I've been writing. I've written only about 12 or 13 plays, because each play is a great thrill, but it also takes a long time.
When writers write plays, they write with a lot of passion, like going into the skin of the character. Like then when they convince actors to play with the same kind of passion, how do they convince them?
Poetry is emotion recollected in tranquility. Not emotion when it's happening. The emotions are dur jaun. You sit back and say, what was that emotion about? If you are in the middle of the worst love poems are those which are written when the love is strong but this is not true of plays. In plays, if you want to go away, you have to think about it and give it a structure. They are not written in passion. I don't know anyone who did that. Because then ultimately only passion comes, but the play doesn't come. The play has to come as a complete entity, artistic entity.
माझा क्वेश्चन असा आहे की तुम्ही प्लीज नाटकातल्या फॉर्मेशन्स विषयी बोलाल का? जसं एक्झाम्पल काशीराम कोतवालमधले जे सिस्टमॅटिक डान्स मुवमेंट आहेत ना, ते आणि नाटकातला विषय हे एकमेकांमध्ये खूप जास्त मिळून आलेत. किंवा बेगम बर्वेमध्ये अचानक जेव्हा नाट्यसंगीताचा जसा वापर केला आहे, सो नाटकाचा विषय आणि नाटकात येणारे फॉर्मेशन्स याच्याविषयी.
Kashiram Kotwal is really not a historical play in the sense that he just took a small episode from history. I mean, Kotwal hota, it's really a recreation of a period by Tendulkar, which is as a reflection on modern politics, you see. And Kashiram Kotwal, as an example of a play, is not a good example, because it was created not only by Tendulkar, but by the dance teacher, by Bhaskar Chandavarkar, by Jabbar Patel. It's a completely unique piece of theatre. You have to, you can only talk about it as theatre completely in terms of its movement. To take Kashiram Kotwal as a play only, you can take Tendulkar's other plays and analyze them because they were written as prose plays with structures. But Kashiram is one of those unique plays, one of those unique creations, which is a theatre creation. आणि त्यामुळे मला तरी ते असं ॲनालाइज करणं जरा मुश्किल होतं. इट हॅज नेवर बीन रिपीटेड. तेंडुलकर नेवर ट्राय टू रिपीट इट. इट हॅज नॉट बीन रिपीटेड एनीवेअर एल्स.
Is it possible to use the same amount of creative carpentry and architecture with the histories as it is with myth?
It has nothing to do with subject. It's not a question of whether it's history or it's myth or it's modern play. No, it has nothing to do with it. That is a technique. The carpentry किंवा artistry मी जे म्हणत होतो त्यामुळे म्हटलं, when Bhimsen Joshi learns to sing his alap, it's not just alap in one rag that he's singing. He's using his whole kantha. and how to go from one swar to another, how to bring them together, how he's building he's learning a whole craft which he applies to various ragas. And this is also true of the craft of playwriting. I think I've become a better playwright with each play because I've learned with each play how to deal with it. And that's why deliberately I started Yayati, which was my first play, Tughlaq, which was my historical play, Hayavadhan, which was a folk play, and recently I have written modern plays on, Une Pure Shahar Ek. But I will tell you, Une Pure Shahar Ek, now difficult for me to analyze it like I have analyzed Yayati, because Yayati was my first play, and I was very conscious of what I was doing. Une Pure Shahar Ek, I have certain confidence that I can hide the technique. It all looks, people say to me, Are, it looks like a few scenes from the city. Is that all it is? They don't know how hard I worked at it to get them together. And to be able to do that, I needed a certain skill and experience, which could come only after so many years of working with so many directors, actors, and so on. So the real skill of an artist is to hide his skill, and this is true not only of playwrights, it's also true of musicians, as I said. You have to, and this is why I'm talking to you today. Don't just think that a subject or this will make a play. You got to work to and read other plays and see how a particular problem has been solved, how Shakespeare has solved his problem, how Kalidas has solved his problem, how Bhavabhuti, you must see, how Mruchakatik. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. I was very lucky that I did a film called Utsav, and I did script of Mruchakatik, and I was amazed how cleverly it was written, how intelligently it was written. So you need to learn. It's not bhakta pratibha nahi hai iti. You need to learn like a musician learns, you need to learn like an architect learns. You have to sit there and learn how to do a scene, and it helps. And unfortunately, Amchakada, we don't have enough workshops that happen, but really to have workshops with actors and experienced directors and actors asking questions, and that is a grave learning process. A director like Satyadev Dubey was a great guru, Tyadrushtina. And you have to, and don't think, this is the other point that I want to make, although it's not strictly relevant. Don't think it's only related to Natak and Sahitya. Your life is very much related. What you learn from life and go into it. There's a famous British actor whose name escapes me for the moment. He says, to me, when I'm given a role to act, when I'm asked to Hamlet, sir, how do I approach it? To me, it's like a psychiatrist facing a patient. The patient comes to a psychiatrist, and to baralto, kai sangto, that happened, this happened, this happened. The character speech is like that, There are gaps in it and so on. The actor has to look at it like a psychiatrist looks at the statements of the patient and say, now what does it mean? Why are these contradictions? How do I make contradictions work? What do I take out? How do I make it consistent? Or if I don't make it consistent, how do I make sense of it? And then when he has done everything, he refers to his own experience. There are good psychiatrists and bad psychiatrists, although they all know the same psychiatry. And this really comes from their human understanding of what must have happened, how to create that particular, how to understand that particular patient. And this is why there are good productions and bad productions of the same play, and where the director and the actors know their own experience of life and bring it to them. This is why just do not dissociate craftsmanship from life. That's where you learn it. That's where you pick it up.
Art leads and craft follows. You don't seem to believe that. Craft leading art, doesn't it make second-rate art?
You see, there are second-rate artists and first-rate artists. They are heads. Every artist cannot be, not every musician can be a Josna Bhole, for a singer can be a Josna Bhole. Let's remember her since we are in her hall. There has to be a talent. There has to be a basic talent, and there has to be a struggle to become bigger than that. But what happens with great artists, say, I don't know, take someone like Bhimsen Joshi. Bhimsen Joshi continually changed gurus. You know, he started with Gadag, then he came here, then he went to Kesarbai Kerkar, even because a great talent like his is a handicap. You know, you get stuck. You have to crash through it. And Bhimsen Joshi could have always remained a second-rate, very good singer because the gala, Devanas dilela gala hota to. But what he did was to rehearse the riyaz 8 tas per day. He would do it so that he could twist it and go beyond and not be satisfied with what was easily available. And that is craft. That's why Bhimsen used to, and you know, Bhimsen Joshi had a shishya called Madhav Gudi. I'm sorry to take the name now, who could sing exactly like Bhimsen Joshi. And, you know, he could reproduce everything, but no one knows of Madhav Gudi because it came too easy for him. You know, he had the gift and he sang. Bhakta. It didn't become a curse. With someone like Bhimsen Joshi, that kind of pratibha becomes a curse, and then he learns to break it and go through it, and then becomes big. I think that's very essential. And that's where you need craft, and that's where you need gurus. Very, in all crafts, it's very difficult for anyone to develop on one's own. You need people to guide you, to tell those who have experience, and tell you which way to go.
सर तुम्ही टेक्निकल सोल्युशनबद्दल बोललात क्राफ्टमध्ये उदाहरणार्थ पुरूच्या पत्नीचं तुम्ही पात्र निर्माण केलं तर मला हे विचारायचं आहे की त्याला आणखीन काही सोल्युशन्स पण तुम्ही पाहिली होतीत का आणि पुरूच्या पत्नीचं पात्रच हे परफेक्ट सोल्युशन आहे हे तुम्ही कसं ठरवलं
Other playwrights have taken that story and tried different things. You know, the whole, if you read Visa Khandekar's Yayati, it's a 600-page book. But this whole exchange of father and son takes barely 50 pages. पटकन होऊन जातं ते. मला आश्चर्य वाटलं. मला वाटलं इतका महत्त्वाचा प्रसंग कसा असा खांडेकरांनी म्हणजे. But that's his solution. आता whether it's the correct solution or not is for the critics to decide, for the readers to decide. I found a different solution, that's all. You have to find your own solution and you have to be happy with it. And you have to make sure that you're not pinched it from somewhere else, particularly when... I'm not saying that is the only solution, but that was my solution to it.
From the Ram Ganesh Gadkari to Vasant Kanetkar, Shirvadkar, you will find that one dialogue express the main content of the play or the main philosophy of the play. Is it why it comes to rescue to the author that it is necessary to write at least a full stretch-wise main character thinking or what the author wants to express, and he takes an advantage or he takes an benefit or he tries to rescue himself while writing the big dialogue. Even in Shantata Court, she has also tried, Tendulkar also tried through her mouth to take that rescue. Is it necessary in the play that author should express with his whole content through the big dialogue, 1-page, 2-page dialogue, or some elaborative things right here? Why not only in 1 or 2 sentences? It happens in the life. Nobody talks in the practically a huge philosophy in the life while in the regular dialogue. But why it requires in the playwriting one? I
don't agree 1 or 2 lines make a play. Every line matters, and a good playwright will use every line to build up. That's why I said he has no time to waste. He's there. I had taken some examples here, which I didn't want to take waste of. I'll read you 3 or 4 lines from Macbeth, none of which are about the main story. You know what Macbeth is. Macbeth is someone who grabs a throne which is not his, and he makes himself a king. And in the very first scene, he comes and he sees 3 witches, and one of the witches say, "Hail, Thane of Cawdor," or whatever. And Macbeth says, "The Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in these borrowed robes?" Okay, now look at the image. The image is, why do you dress me in this borrowed robe? Soon after that, after he becomes the king, there is this. New honors come upon him like strange garments, cleave not to their mold, but with the aid of use. Another later. He cannot buckle his distempered cause within the belt of rule. Now, it has been pointed out how in Shakespeare every image helps the main thing, the borrowing, the thing. It's not just the main story, it's not just one or two lines, but every little, what you think is a literary image and which has nothing to do with it. But these images help to drive home the point that you're talking about a man who is working with borrowed ropes, borrowed things and so on. And as I said, again, I won't go into it. If you read Shakuntal and you see how the image of the deer is used, it starts with the deer being chased by Dushyant, the Yeto, and then the image of the deer is developed, and there's a frightened deer, and the deer goes on, and so on and so on, until at the end, when peace has returned to the earth, Kalidas says, under the tree stood a pair of deers, male and female, without any fear. So now, the play is not about deer, the play is about human beings, but he uses Harin and the deers and the imagery right through the play to substantiate and strengthen the main theme. So it's not true that one or two lines make a play. No. Pratyek shabda, pratyek pause. In fact, one of the great, in Marathi playwrights today, the person who uses pauses brilliantly is Mahesh Elkunchwar. In Mahesh, it's very often what the character is not saying that's important. Or when a character says, Asa, ay, barai, this kind of pauses, how he uses, is just extraordinary. I have translated 4 of his plays, hoping to catch his pauses into Kannada, not his words.
Often when I write something and give it to directors or people to read, they say that it is going too slow, or pacing. I'm talking about
Painting.
Pacing, speed.
Well, it goes from way to way. If a play like Waiting for Godot, how do you judge the pace? There is no play. It's a great play. It symbolizes a kind of futility in life, but if it had a structure that you could find, then it would be self-defeating. The whole point of the play is that it has no structure. Or he gives an impression that it has no structure. But remember that Waiting for Godot, although it looks structureless, there are 2 acts which repeat the same thing. So by repetition, he does exactly what Shakespeare does. He repeats the same story slightly differently. These are various devices. I'm not saying that's the device, but all I'm saying is that by writing 1 play or 2 play, you will never become a very great writer, nor should you feel disheartened if your first play doesn't succeed. It's a process. Like music, you have to go on learning to become more and more complex in writing. Yeah. You need more complexity, you need more technique, that's all.
If you can talk about your play Wedding Album.
What I suddenly felt that realism, thanks to the influence of Ibsen, and thanks to what Ibsen has been made by Marathi playwrights, like Moga Rangnekar and all the people who followed him, up to Tendulkar, vagere. Realism has come to mean something that happens in a drawing room to the middle class. That has what it's come to mean. You take a marvelous play like Kanyadan, where the main character is about a Dalit writer, vagere, and the key controversies are Dalit and Nayakal. But what is the theme of the play? The play blames the father for the daughter marrying a Dalit. That's it. At the end of it, ती मुलगी सगळी जबाबदारी आपल्या बापावर घालून निघून जाते, and Tendulkar says the whole house collapses around him. So in fact, it becomes a middle class play. The Dalit becomes irrelevant to the whole theme of the play, really. And I said this to Tendulkar, that you say it's about Dalits, but really in your climax, you behave like Manusmriti, holding the father responsible for ती मुलगी 25 वर्षाची होती आणि तिने लग्न करून घेतलं. Why are you worried? What are you making such a bugaboo about it and blaming the father for it? But this is a very recurrent pattern in all Indian plays, which is that we tend to take the middle class and the particular middle class attitudes of. I wanted to bring, write in wedding album, how everything is nebulous. You know, people really think, and this is particularly explicit in Satyadev Dubey did a version of my wedding album called Haravleल्या Athvani and so on. And the wedding album is about a girl who gets married ultimately to a boy from America and so on. And Satyadev Dubey, in the end, the girl comes and says, "Oh, he has said yes, he has said yes, he has said yes," etc. You know, and so on. I said, Satyadev, it's only in your place that girls say that. You know, I can tell you when my sister got married to someone in America, she couldn't sleep for 3 months because she didn't know what life was ahead of her, who was one thing to marry him from a distance, then to spend a lifetime with him, you know, and what was the expectation, me, aple aayi pasun dur, you know, not 1 and 2, there were hundreds of things. I said, only you can make the girl say, he said yes, he said yes. My sister didn't. So I wanted to catch the complexity of that kind of a middle class. You know, my sister got married to someone from outside, and it was not a happy occasion. You know, and we don't, and then also Une Pure Shahar Ek, we don't look at, Atami, I don't look at Purana, etc. I just sit at home and listen to my servants. Well, there enough drama happens there to kai hotas, you know, to what they go through, what they suffer, and so on. And this is a subject that I must mention. That really younger playwrights need to tackle, which is what are the cities coming to? What is happening to our city life? When you see at middle class life, particularly in Marathi, but also in Kannada, it's the middle class life of the 30s and the 40s, as it was there, you know, the traditional middle class. But today, with call centers, because of the freedom, non-freedom, or you know, the kind of people from villages flooding into Pune or Mumbai and so on, and creating a non-Pune citizenship. How do they live? Now, it's full of drama there. But we don't look at it because all our writers are many of our writers are mostly from the middle class and have been to middle class schools and have read middle class novels and have got middle class attitudes. Kannada, there have been some very good writing by Dalit writers because of that. But even in Karnataka, something like the city, what I'm talking about, like in Pune, really has blossomed out in the last 20 years. You know, it's changed, the notional. And I really feel that this is where the future generation should look at to see how that is affecting us. I hope I can stop with that. Okay, thank you. Thank you.